Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braj Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braj Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Jaya Radha Madhava, Radha Madhava Radhe.
Jaya Radha Madhava, Radha
Jaya Jagannatha Baladeva, Jaya Subhadra, Jaya Sudarshana.
Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Subhadramai, Jaya Sudarshana.
Jaya Gauranita, 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 Jaya Gauranita.
Jaya Gauranita, Jaya Gauranita, Gauranita,
Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Anantade, Prahlad Narasimha, Jaya Anantade.
Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Anandade, Narasimha, Jaya Anandade.
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev.
Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari
जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्रजाकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर सदस्य श्रीमद् अभय चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्रजाकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर सदस्य श्रीमद् भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। नामाचार्य श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधरा श्रीवासादि गौरभक्त वृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। वृषभूमि श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। मायापुर श्री नवद्वीप धाम की जय। मथुरा धाम की जय। द्वारका धाम की जय। जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी महारानी की जय। समवेत गौरभक्त वृंद की जय। गौरभक्त प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So Hare Krishna devotees, welcome for ISKCON Seshadripuram morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are supposed to be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 14th chapter, 24th verse. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Narayanam Namaskritya
Narayanam Namaskritya
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Tato Jayamudiraye
Tato Jayamudiraye
Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu
Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Bhagavati Uttama Shloke
Bhagavati Uttama Shloke
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki.
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki.
Harihi Om Tat Sat. I'll share the screen. Okay, so the verse, as I said, is Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 14th chapter, verse number 24. I'll read the verse. Etasyaam sadvi sandhyayam Bhagavan bhuta bhavanaha Paritho bhuta pashadbhir Vrishna Vrishenatati bhutarat. Etasyaam sadvi sandhyayam Bhagavan bhuta bhavanaha Parito bhuta pashadbhir vrishenatati bhutarat. Etasyaam shadvi sandhyayam Bhagavan bhuta bhavanaha Parito bhuta pashadbhir vrishenatati bhutarat. Word to word translation. Etasham, in this period, Shadvi, O chaste one, Sandhyayam, at the junction of day and night, evening, Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, Bhuta Bhavanaha, the well-wisher of the ghostly characters, Paritaha, surrendered by, Bhuta Pashadbhir, Bihi, by ghostly companions, Vrishena, on the back of the bull carrier, Atati, travels, Bhutarat, the king of the ghosts. Translation. Lord Shiva, the king of the ghosts, sitting on the back of his bull carrier, travels at this time accompanied by ghosts who follow him for their welfare. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Lord Shiva or Rudra is the king of the ghosts. Ghostly characters worship Lord Shiva to be gradually guided towards the path of self-realization. Mayavadi philosophers are mostly worshippers of Lord Shiva, and Sripada Sankaracharya is considered to be the incarnation of Lord Shiva for preaching godlessness to the Mayavadi philosophers. Ghosts are bereft of a physical body because of their grievously sinful acts, such as suicide. The last resort of the ghostly characters in human society is to take shelter of suicide, either material or spiritual. Material suicide causes loss of the physical body, and spiritual suicide causes loss of the individual identity. Mayavadi philosophers desire to lose their individuality and merge into the impersonal spiritual Brahmajyoti existence. Lord Shiva, being very kind to the ghosts, sees that although they are condemned, they get physical bodies. He places them into the wombs of women who indulge in sexual intercourse regardless of the restrictions of time and circumstances. Kashyapa wanted to impress this fact upon Diti so that she might wait for a while. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurvunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadanti Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजन सहितं कृष्ण चैतन्य देवं श्री राधा कृष्ण पादान् सहगन ललिता श्री विशाखान्वितांश्च हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीन बंधु जगत्पते गोपेशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी ऋषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभयेव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः नमः ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिन् इति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे हरि ओम तत्सत् नमः ओं विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते जयपताक स्वामिनिति नामिने नमः आचार्य पादाय निताय कृपा प्रदायिने गौरकथा दामदाय नगरक्रमतारिणे. Let's read the translation once more. Lord Shiva, the king of the ghosts, sitting on the back of his bull carrier, travels at this time accompanied by ghosts who follow him for their welfare. So this verse is part of the part of the third canto, which is status quo, and the chapter is entitled Pregnancy of Diti in the Evening, and we are reading this verse number 24. So this context is the Varaha avatar. When he came, then he killed Hiranyaksha. So the question was by Vidura to Maitreya Muni was like, what is this story of Hiranyaksha? How is it that he was born, and how is it that he became so, the terrorizing the entire world? What is the background? So in that context, this birth of Hiranyaksha was discussed, particularly in this section about the background of how such children are born to the in this material world, very ghostly, very demoniac kind of children are born in this material world. And here in this particular verse, it's mentioned about the position of Lord Shiva. Here it's mentioned Lord Shiva, because the background again is that Kashyapa Muni was pressurized by Diti to have relationship at an odd time when Kashyapa Muni was doing his meditation. It was evening time, and overwhelmed with the sexual desire, she was actually compelling him to get into a relationship at that point in time in the evening. And Kashyapa Muni was actually trying to make her see sense that this is not the right time to have a relationship, and particularly in the evening time when Lord Shiva is supposed to be actually going around traveling. Is mentioned that he goes around the material universe And that's his time when he goes along with all his accomplishes, particularly on his bull carrier, Nandi, he's called like that. So I was listening to one of Guru Maharaj's class, my spiritual master Solna Jai Patak Maharaj. So he was saying, just like we have Brahma Muhurta, that means 1.5 hours before the sun rise. Like that in the evening, it is called as Shiva Muhurta. So that's the time when Lord Shiva actually travels with all his entourage supervising the world. So it is very important that we be respectful at that point in time, and perform nice activities so that Lord Shiva is pleased. Lord Shiva is Ashutosh, he is very merciful on the fallen souls. So, in fact, Guru Maharaj was mentioning that generally Prabhupada, not specifically that because of Lord Shiva or anything, but Guru Maharaj was mentioning Prabhupada when he was in this material world. The evening times he will encourage all his disciples to chant the Purusha Shukta mantras, and then in the evenings he will ask them to blow conch and then open all the windows and then show nice incense, nice incense. It will be like full of smokes and all that. So nice incense in the evening. He did not elaborate much on the reasons for it, but then in the evening time he used to have Purusha Shuktas sung in his room, like that he used to do. So, but point, in one sense is that evening time is very important, that very nice activities needs to be performed, particularly here when Lord Shiva is going around and seeing what are the living beings doing on the material world, and he is very, very merciful. That's the important thing. So we can actually please Lord Shiva and get bhakti. This is very important from Vaishnava parampara, that if someone is very merciful in someone who's very close to the Supreme Lord, but he is also very merciful, our natural immediate inclination should be to just seek bhakti or devotional life to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, what he himself has got. Lord Shiva himself is considered the most prominent Vaishnava. So Vaishnavanam Tata Sambhu. So he is considered a very, very, very highly elevated personality. So if you really look at it, he is the, what do you call, the husband of Parvati, who is supposed to be literally the empowered personality to manage the material affairs of this universe. In that sense, he is basically the controller of the material activities around this world thing. So he is very, very powerful, even powerful than Lord Brahma. And very next to the Lord Vishnu, very, very close to him, very, very minute differences. It is said, right? He consists of I think 54 qualities, while Lord Vishnu consists of 60 qualities, while Krishna has 64 qualities. So, he is such a very elevated personality, but then if you really look at him, he is completely fixed up in meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When he's literally there, but at the same time, he's so focused on his devotion that he does not want to be distracted by any opulence, in spite of his wife being the person who completely manages this entire material universe. So anything and everything at his disposal, but then he does not connect himself to anything, but he is simply detached, and he is literally there in the, in the Masana, or the so-called place of the destruction of the body. And of course, naturally there, the place where these bodies, the souls, and then the opportunities a place where naturally when someone, all these ghostly characters, naturally when you leave the body, the soul actually is leaving the body there at this point in time and gets away because the body is burnt at this point in time. And at that point in time, good souls of course do migrate on, but then the souls which are like having a very ghostly nature, particularly those that commit suicide and die. There are many people who commit suicide. Incidentally, I was looking at some statistics on this, suicides in India, and India seems to have one of the highest suicide rates in this world. There was a global chart of suicides, and I was saying, it's very, very pathetic that India, which has such a wonderful cultural background, but in spite of it, in India, we are actually having the situation of having many people committing suicides. And that's very, very sad to, actually comprehend. You cannot comprehend such a thing at all. India is supposed to be the world headquarters for spiritual knowledge. Then where is the question of, which means spiritual knowledge means understanding that I am not the body, I am the soul, and this journey is actually towards self-realization. But because of our over influence of the Western world, we have taken up upon us that this understanding that we are only the body, and anything to do with the body, we need to be very successful in this life, and if we don't succeed in this life, then this life itself is such a waste, and therefore there's no point in living, and people commit suicide. I saw something like, I don't remember the statistics, like something like 125,000 people or something like that committing suicide every year. So that is a very sad state of affairs. But then what happens to such people? Like, that's the next question, coming to the spiritual point. That what happens to such people? Normally, a soul, after it leaves his body, it is carried over by the false ego, intelligence and false ego, and mind intelligence and false ego. The body dies, that is, the gross body dies, but the subtle body does not die. It actually is the one which basically carries the soul, which is encaged inside this body. Because the body has become useless now, the soul is taken out, and it is being carried by these three elements to the next body, wherever it is destined to go, based on the actions that the person has done in the previous body. But these ghosts, these people who do not want to go through their karma, whatever, if I have to suffer, I have to suffer. But then if I take a shortcut to say, okay, no, therefore I can't take this, because their understanding is completely wrong. They think I am the body, and body means I need to be successful in these things. If I don't do it, there's no point in living. Let me give up my body. So such people, even though they think like that, the fact remains that they are the soul, and they are supposed to have experienced certain things in this body. Now, if you have not done that, and if you are forcibly trying to deny or defy the laws of nature, laws of nature has its own way of dealing with such people, and therefore such persons are not given another body. So they are actually going around helplessly without having a body to execute whatever they want to do in the next life. Therefore, they hang as ghosts, means its consciousness is there. That means the mind, intelligence, and false ego, but that does not have a gross body to exhibit their presence. So it's a very, very unfortunate and difficult situation for the ghosts. They have to be there for, it's quite a long period of time when they need to be like that. It's a punishment, actually, not like, if for a normal time I would have died if I don't commit suicide in a couple of years' time, possibly. But then if I commit suicide, I may have to be in that ghost body for much, not body, in a ghost form for much, much longer period of time as a punishment, because I dared to negate the laws of nature, or dared to oppose the laws of nature, or rather I lived in ignorance of the fact that I am the soul and not the body. But then, so that is a very highly abominable act to commit suicide, But then, if you see here, Ashutosh, Lord Shiva is so merciful that he even gives them his mercy. That, okay, I give you yet another chance, to get into this material world. So he helps them with the body. So it's like, it's like that, So when people are actually committing suicides, they are in ghosts, and then they are actually going after Lord Shiva with the hope that, he will help them get a body. So, and Lord Shiva, how the body can be given, the body has to be given through when there is some like relationship happening between man and woman. Therefore, he is looking at, is there any, it's not like these ghostly personalities are to be destined to get very wonderful parents, or something like that, right? It's you are after all in under a punishment mode, so you have to have little bit of difficulties in all of the in your what you get in the next body or whatever. So naturally, then he is looking for, when Lord Shiva is watching over this material world, he is looking for people where there is no regulation is there in the life. So he sees some women having relationship at odd times, which is not in a regulated manner. Then he says, so, hey, ghost number so and so, Guru Maharaj was saying like this, hey, ghost number 2505, you come over, you get into this womb of this woman, like that. So he was saying like that in a very humorous manner. But then that's the fact that therefore Lord Shiva mercifully puts those jivas, or those ghostly characters, into the womb of such women who are not following regulations in the Grahastha-ashrama. So that is mentioned there. Therefore, the point is also in the Grahastha-ashrama, one needs to follow the regulative principles, particularly in terms of having having children. Then there is this concept called the Garbhadan. That's a samskara which is done. And then the boy and the girl, in our moment, it's like you chant 64 rounds of Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, then you purify your consciousness, and then you try to bring out a child to this material world. Of course, it was also mentioned that they go in the morning, take darshan of the lordships, pray that he sends a very nice soul into to them, so that they can actually help that soul also come up in Krishna consciousness. So this is the normal process. But when there is something like this where irregulated, particularly here in odd times, when in the evening time it is there, then it creates reasons for all these ghostly characters to come into this material world and create disruption. So Hiranyaksha was one such character that he had to be brought in here to create a destruction. Of course, we know Hiranyaksha was originally the Jai Vijay, the brothers there, but then they have been given this opportunity to come to this material world and create havoc. And therefore, in that sense, by the logic of how these demoniac characters are impregnated into this into the womb when irregulated activities are happening, in that way Hiranyaksha actually came into the womb of Diti at that point in time. So that was the background. And because of that, he was very demoniac, and he actually came out and created so huge disruptions in this material world, and then Varahadev actually came and actually killed him at a later point in time. So this is the overall background. In between, if you see here, this commentary is given by Srila Prabhupada, where he is mentioning that the suicide of the body is one aspect of it, but then we are not always talking about the body. Is the body, when you talk about self-realization, we also talk about the soul. So when there is a suicide for the body, there is also a so-called suicide for the soul, in the sense this soul is supposed to progress nicely in devotional life, nicely in the aspect of self-realization. The body is used to be used, like, you are given a body so that you should progress, right? If you don't progress, and if you waste that body, and you kill yourself, like that. Similarly, the soul is also having a journey of self-realization. But if that journey of self-realization is used wrongly, and then the purpose is not reached, then that is also considered what you call suicide. That's called spiritual suicide. So this Mayavad, the philosophy Prabhupada is mentioning here, is basically something like committing spiritual suicide. That because the idea of self-realization is to understand that I am the supreme, I am the soul, and I am subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and my job is basically to do devotional service onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela, there is this wonderful chapter on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's discussion with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Now, if you see, there is this discussion. It's a very strong discussion between Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who is basically inspired by the Mayavad philosophy. And here Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is actually taking a very, like how a surgeon actually takes a knife and cuts through the body of the deceased person so that, he can cure that person. So there's a lot of pain in that. Like this here, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu cuts through Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's all of these disease of Mayavad, and then there's a long chapter on that. So there is one particular verse where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is telling there, which I will read. Bhagavan Sambandha Bhakti Abhideya Haya Prema Prayojana Veda Tina Vastu Kaya. Now read the translation. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu continued, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the central point of all relationships. Acting in devotional service to Him is one's real occupation, and the attainment of love of God is the ultimate goal of life. These three subject matters are described in the Vedic literature. So this is actually what the Vedic literatures give. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not mincing words, very clear. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not mincing words, he is very clear. He is saying the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the central point of all relationships. Acting in devotional service to Him is one's real occupation, and the attainment of love of Godhead is the ultimate goal of life. These three subject matters are described in the Vedic literature. Therefore, one needs to be clear that these three aspects are the main subject matter of Vedic scriptures. Now, this Mayavad philosophy is basically using the Vedic scripture to deny the existence of God. That the soul is actually God Himself. That kind of a discussion is what this Mayavad theory is actually propagating. Therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very, very strong on this aspect with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Now, if you read the next verse, it is mentioned, Are ye kichu kahe Sakala hi kalpana swatah pramana veda vakya kalpane lakshana. If one tries to explain the Vedic literature in a different way, he is indulging in imagination. Any interpretation of the self-evident Vedic version is simply imaginary. So this is very important. Therefore, interpreting the Vedic scriptures in any other way other than the three aspects that was given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on the earlier verse, that should be the purpose of educating or using the Vedic scriptures to educate people on the path of self-realization. But if you know, this Mayavad theory is actually completely the opposite of it. So there is this one particular verse where it is mentioned, if you see, I will just read this verse. See, this verse is like this. This is Madhya Leela, 6th chapter, 180, verse number 182. It is mentioned, Mayavadam Asat Shastram Prachannam Baudam Uchyate Mayaiva Vihitam Devi Kalau Brahmana Murtina. So it is mentioned here about the appearance of Lord Shankaracharya, appearance of Sripad Sankaracharya. So Mayavadan Asat Shastram. That means this Mayavada is Asat Shastram. Asat Shastram means it is false scriptures. Okay, and Prachannam Baudam Uchyate. The word Prachannam is basically it's covered. Prachannam means is covered. Baudam Uchyate means Baudam means Buddhism. Uchyate means it is said. So it is said that this Mayavad is basically a covered form of Buddhism. Mayaiva Vihitam Devi. Mayaiva means by me. Eva only. Vihitam taught. Devi, O goddess of the material world. Mayaiva Vihitam Devi Kalau Brahmana Murtinaha. In Kali Yuga, Brahmana Murti means in the form of a Brahman, like the body of a Brahman. So this is spoken by Lord Shiva. So this Lord Shiva speaks this to his wife Parvati, that in the Kali Yuga, I will go and uh, preach the covered Buddhism through the means of Asat Shastram, through what do you call not genuine Shastra. Like, I will preach this in the form of a Brahmana in the Kali Yuga. So there is this background here. So in fact, if you see the next verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, while condemning this Mayavad philosophy, he says, in fact, before this verse, actually, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu actually also clarifies why does Lord Shiva do such a thing. He says, Acharyena dosha nahi, Ishvara agna haila, ateva kalpana kari, nashtika shastra kaila. So he says, actually there is no fault on the part of Shankaracharya. He simply carried out the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He had to imagine some kind of interpretation, and therefore he presented a kind of Vedic literature that is full of atheism. So this is very clear. So it's not like Sri Shankaracharya, who is basically incarnation of Lord Shiva, is doing something which is not following the path of Krishna. So it is basically the will of the Lord that Lord Shiva goes down into this material world in Kali to preach the impersonalism thing. So it is based on the instruction of Krishna that Lord Shiva as Shankaracharya is coming and was spreading this Mayavad philosophy. But again, therefore, can you ask, therefore, is this that it's will of the Lord that we should all follow Mayavad philosophy, and then, because that's anyway, a lot of this Mayavadis actually also argue like this. These Vaishnavas, they are actually going against the will of the Lord. That, Lord wanted this Mayavad philosophy to spread, and therefore, why are they actually trying to take up devotional service? So these are all concocted thinking, or rather not understanding the full aspects of it. I have heard Prabhupada speak on this matter in different times. I mean, in different contexts, or rather different times to explain, Sri Shankaracharya's arrival and the how the whole thing evolved. So initially, those days, when long back, right? When the Brahmanas were actually misusing the Vedic scriptures to mislead the people. That of course, the Vedic scriptures were authority, just like we say in our constitution, the law books are the authority. Whether you know or not, the rules you have to follow, and if you make a mistake, even unknowing of the law, for example, you are supposed to drive a motor car on the left side of the road in Indian context, right? You are supposed to know that. It's not. Sometimes you may not know. You may just drive on the right side, and then you may be captured by the police and say that you are not supposed to drive on the right side. No, sir, I didn't know, because or you go into a one-way road, and then there's one way, right? No entry road. You go into one-way road, and then you suddenly see some police catching, and then say, no, sir, I'm sorry, I did not see. I'm not aware that this is a one no entry road. That ignorance is not an excuse. You will be punished for that. So like that, whether we know the Shastras or not, we are supposed to follow the law. So like this, those days, people were very very conversant with the Vedic scriptures, and they were following it. So now, but wrong interpretation, there are many lawyers, right? They will argue on the other side of law and even sometimes win the case. Like this, there were some Brahmanas who are misinterpreting the scriptures and also misleading the people. So in that process, what happened was, people were all getting led in the wrong way. And these Brahmanas were also like eating meat and all of that, but at the same time justifying them using scriptures. So they were basically they were becoming Shudras, or even worse than that, but they were making a show that we are great Brahmanas and they are trying to lead the society. So then at that point in time, Lord Vishnu, he then decided, okay, these people are actually using this authority of the Vedic scriptures to actually do misdeeds. And it is so much ingrained into the head because the Vedas, as I said, it's the constitution. So people are all fully conscious or were cognizant of the Vedas, and therefore, whether rightly or wrongly propagated, they wanted to follow it like that. So the Lord actually decided to come in the form of Buddha to actually uh, remove the reliance of the people on the Vedic scriptures. So he came and said, there is nothing called scriptures, there is nothing called soul, there is actually zero, everything is zero. Like, there's nothing, after you die, you are just zero, there's nothing. So this zero, sunya, it's basically zero. Buddhism is about like nothing exists, nothing, that kind of thing. And he preached, his idea was to remove the concept of the reliance on the Vedic scriptures, make people forget this Vedic scriptures. And he preached this zeroism, and slowly people lost faith on the Vedas. And so Buddhism is all about, okay, he preached non-violence, some very basic tenets of, see, if you are completely corrupt, like some people are smoking or drinking and all that, then the way to, at least, scientifically they say, okay, then you slowly, gradually reduce them from these habits, keep them away from these habits slowly like that. So like that, the idea is like, they will not be able to understand if you suddenly say, no, this, whatever you are understanding is wrong, they will not accept it. So better you nullify that entire basis on which they are doing all these activities, which is the Vedic scripture. So he said, okay, he want to cover this Vedas. So he took up this philosophy of Buddhism of, basic nice living. That means proper living is most important than trying to understand some other things. So he brought them to think of ahimsa and, tolerance, many of these concepts, very basic concepts. These are all not spiritual. They are very basic things of, from an animal, how you change to a human being, some basic concepts of, truth, many of these things were there. So even if you don't even have that, how will you understand spiritual, high spiritual knowledge? Therefore, he brought these things like elementary mathematics, like 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. And people slowly became completely fixed up in this kind of a Buddhism, but they have forgotten the Vedic scriptures. But that is also not truth, right? Because ultimately it is the Vedas which needs to be the governing principle of our life. Vedas, the scriptures, the realization of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the purpose of life. And in that process, as a next stage, the Lord actually requested Shankara or requested Lord Shiva, now you go to this material world and try to establish the Vedas, in a sense. So that's the next step. So when he came in, he re-established the Vedas, but of course it is actually not direct, right? Vedas, if you realize, it talks Brahman. Mostly it talks about Brahman. It talks, 95% of these Vedic scriptures is about Karma Kanda. So he wanted to bring back the regulations onto this material world, but in the process, there was so much of not directly talking about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and there was so many misinterpretation of that, and that's why it becomes a covered Buddhism. That means he came and preached Advaita. That means one, Buddhism is zero. That means nothing. But he came and said, no. There is something, and that something is actually only one, and everything is part of that one. That means you, me, the so-called Lord, if you want to call it, everything is one. And we are all part of the same, that kind of a thing. He said there is one. It's not zero, it is one. That's how he preached. But that is not also true, right? That's just gradual progression. Like, okay, like when you learn something, you learn from, you suddenly don't jump to something higher. So you are taught, okay, I'm talking about the mass change of the entire humanity of millions and billions of people. It's not something which you can do it like that, right? There's a process. There's a very fine way of doing this, and the Lord knows, who knows better than the Lord. So he brought in that the same Lord can make the entire world immediately also Krishna conscious. That's a different thing. So he chose to do like this, that, okay, now you come one step further to accept that there is something supreme. Maybe at that point in time you do not accept that, that supreme is separate and the jiva is separate. Then later, after Shankaracharya established like this and went, and then he later sent his devotees, then Ramanujacharya came, Madhvacharya came, and then they preached, no, 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 it is not zero, it is not one also, it is actually two. That means the Supreme Lord is one and your Jiva is another one, and these two are actually uh, separate, they are not one. And the jiva's position is to serve that supreme, that big one, that of the two, one is the Supreme Lord, one is the jiva, and the jiva's position is always to serve that supreme one, Supreme Lord. So they established the concept of Dvaita, right? Dvaita philosophy, that means two. So if you see Ramanujacharya, he will have his hand like this, like, to indicate that, the jiva is separate and the Supreme Lord is separate. So this is the next concept. Then we know, of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramanujacharya is Vishishta Advaita. That is slightly, so Dvaita is two, Advaita is one. And why Vishishta Advaita? That means Ramanujacharya came and said the same concept of two, but he put it as the one which is very special. That way he put it, the one which is special. So he put the whole thing as like that is the supreme person, and then the living beings and then the material world are also very closely knit components of that one. So that one is very prominent, and this he accepted that this jivas are the part and parcel of that supreme, like that. So that is the Visishta Advaita. That means special one. Advaita is like completely Mayavad. Dvaita is Vaishnava philosophy. Vishishta Advaita is Vaishnava philosophy, but it sort of brought both these concepts together to say, no, it is one, but at the same time, that one actually has these jivas which are actually part and parcel of it. He was talking of that concept of it. But then when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came, he actually perfectly reconciled both of it. He said, Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva. That means inconceivably one and different. So he actually established the thing. So we are actually, like Ramanujacharya says, it is actually one. Yes, it is one, but at the same time they are inconceivably different. It's not like one is completely dependent on the other. Like in one say, if you say everything is one, then there is also this concept of without this that cannot exist. That is not true, because the Lord will is irrespective of, he is not dependent on anything. He is completely independent. It is not like material nature is required for the Lord to survive, or the jivas are required for the Lord to survive. But at the same time, everything is part of that Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is Achintya, that means inconceivable. Beda means different. Abeda, which means non-different. So inconceivably one and simultaneously different. So this is so he basically reconciled all of these things. If you want to really say Mayavad and then the Dvaita, the Visishta Advaita, everything, and brought this concept of not concept, the reality. He established the Tattva, that the original Tattva. Tattva means the truth. He established the truth that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate. The Jiva are part and parcel of him, but that doesn't mean that the Lord is dependent on this Jiva. The Jiva is dependent on the Lord. And of course, the material nature is also there. It's also called the inferior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So is the living entities who are the superior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the inferior energy is tried to be lauded over by the superior energy, but the fact remains that the superior energy should actually go to the even superior, which is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and engage the inferior energy, which in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this margin energy, the Jiva, will have to go towards that Supreme Lord and also engage the inferior energy in that consciousness, and therefore everything is harmonized nicely. But the fact remains that Jiva and the Supreme Lord are actually two different personalities, and the Jiva is actually a servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is what I could share today. I hope I could throw some light on this. This is a very huge concept. Maybe I'm not even qualified to speak on it, but I have tried to repeat what I have heard, whatever from Srila Prabhupada and his commentaries, whatever I have read from Srila Prabhupada's books. So I will end here. If there are any comments, any questions, please you can speak. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Thank
Hare.
you so much for explaining in so easy terms like 0, 1, and 2. Because till now, even I was like a little confused how like Dvaita and Advaita was is distinguished. But in a very simple way, you have explained. Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah, so this can go on like so much. It's not like so simple that that the way, but it's such a high in a high level. If you have to understand it, like that's what I put it. But if you go deeper, it is really confusing, right? The Mayavad philosophy, they will put you in a big chakkar, and finally there is nothing that you will really learn. So again, I'm quoting Prabhupada's view of how things. So it's better we just keep away. If you see this, this liberation of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So actually, it's very heavy. Like how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is condemning this. He says, one should take bath if you are exposed to any Mayavad philosophy. So not to get too much detailed into it, if you go to the thing, there's so much things about this discussion about what is Dvaita, what is Advaita. But then at a high level, this is what it is from a Vaishnava point of view, and we understand the gist of it, but we don't want to dwell too much, go deeper into it, and confuse ourselves and corrupt our consciousness. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dhanavad Pranams.
Hare Krishna. Dandavat Pranam.
Prabhu, I just wanted to know, like I'm very bad at history, so I just wanted to know if these, appearance of Buddha and then Shankaracharya and then no, this Advaita philosophy, all that is in the period of Kali Yuga or before it?
So Ramanujacharya appeared 1,000 years back. We know Kali started somewhere around 5,000 years back, like when Krishna left this planet. And Buddhism, I suppose also, Buddhism was, I think, before. See, there are few things. Like I've also heard the Buddhism that we have today, right? I've seen Prabhupada write this also, that the Buddha who came right now in our lifetime, right? We heard Ashoka followed Buddha, all that you read in the history, right? Prabhupada actually says this Buddha is not that Buddha that is mentioned as the incarnation of Krishna. So it's very difficult to understand this. I've actually heard this, Prabhupada mentioned this also sometime. So that concept of Buddhism was there is what is mentioned about Vishnu taking the form of this Buddhism. Maybe it was in another previous yuga that Prabhupada had mentioned it once time. Maybe this Buddha is basically a kind of what do you call? He's taken inspiration from that Buddha, right? The original Buddha. Maybe that's how I understand based on what I heard from that Prabhupada lecture. But I do not really know the appearance of this Buddha. So that's something which we need to be conscious about. But of course, Sankaracharya came much before Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya. Does that make some understanding, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu. So is it that time Kali Yuga started, or I mean,
Yes.
like when Shankaracharya appeared?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
okay.
See, Shankaracharya appeared 700 BC, I think. I don't know if any one of you know the year. Someone can Google.
Now it is 2022. 700 year 700. 700.
Okay, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Yeah, you can Google it. Maybe what is the appearance time of Shankaracharya, but certainly Madhvacharya and Ramanujacharya came after Shankaracharya.
Yeah. Okay, Prabhu. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Mata. Is there any other comments, questions? Okay, so if nothing, we will conclude here. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thanks. Hare Krishna.
Thanks. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.